Welcome and thanks for joining us on the Blue Chair Podcast, brought to you by a Fresh Wind Church. Each month, we discuss the latest sermons from the perspective of the Blue Chairs.
Hello and welcome to the Blue Chair Podcast. I am Pastor Jared, and we have Charles here as well. Say what's up, Charles.
What's up?
So this is a new project. It is a branch of the Midweek Podcast. If you're a regular listener to the Midweek Podcast, you know me and Charles covered one of the weeks not too long ago. And after that, one of the things that Pastor Ryan really liked about it was hearing Charles' thoughts on it. And it kind of sent him down a rabbit hole. And he's like, I want to hear the thoughts of the people sitting in the blue chairs. Every week he goes up there and preaches. Tim goes up there and preaches. And they do the podcast. And it's all great. But he's always curious what our thoughts are, the ones that sit and listen to it more than actually teaching it or preaching it. And so that is what this project is going to be. We're super excited about it. And we also don't want to limit it to me and Charles. And so if you have thoughts on a week throughout the month, then go ahead and send an email to bluechairpodcast@afreshwind.org. And we may, I can't say we'll read every one of them, all right? But we may read the email on the podcast just to kind of sprinkle in some other thoughts there, and we can talk about them. But this
to be fair, if you're reading it, that's probably not going to get read.
Really, you don't text the guy back a couple times, and he'll just never let you forget it. So this podcast, this project we're doing, it's going to be less formal. It's going to be less about specific points. It's going to be about our thoughts on the sermon. No, I suggested to Ryan that we grade them and give them like a full A, B, C, D, F scale on each sermon. Let them know how they're doing. Keep them on their toes. He shot that down, believe it or not.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, kind of rude if you ask me. But we're going to talk about like how the action points that they've talked about in the Midweek Podcast, how those are working. Like if we're struggling with them, if we're hitting home runs, like if we're nailing it and it's going well, if there are parts of the sermons that we're like, oof, I'm chewing on that one still. And it was week 1 of the month. But that's kind of what this project is going to be. And so let's go ahead and get into episode 1 of this. This last series that we talked about was Samson. What are your thoughts about it, Charles? What stuck out to you? What stuck out to you? What do you like about it the most, or what have you been chewing on the most about it?
I mean, honestly, I think what I liked about it the most is that no matter what each one of us is facing, I feel like everybody, sorry, gotta clear my throat. I feel like everybody can relate to Samson. Like we all know that we have a calling to God. We all know the way that we should be in our path and walk with God, but we all have our moments where we have or will rebel at some point or another, whether it be, making a poor choice or, my early walk, I ran into issues and I ended up turning, I don't want to say I really turned away from God and I didn't acknowledge him anymore. Like I knew he was there. But I think it was, and one of the points, from these sermons that I like is the unchecked anger. I think I had too much unchecked anger and I let that lash out at God. But the thing is like you read this story and it's like, no matter what Samson did, in the end, he turned back to God and God was there for him.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like this story should resonate with all of us in one way or another.
I think it does. And you kind of touched on it with touching about the week 1 and the different starts. One of the parts of the series that stuck out to me like crazy was when Tim was talking about parenting and how our students, our children, like it's not our fault if they step away. Mm-hmm. It's not our fault if they run away. That we could do everything right. Samson's parents nailed it. By all accounts, they did awesome. Yet he was just like, I want none of that. And he just rebelled. And I think that is such an encouragement for me personally, having a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, that I'm like, I got to get all these things perfect. I got to nail it. I'm like worrying about this. I'm stressing about it. But at the end of the day, like, it's in God's hands and he's chasing for him.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this in life group. It was one of the topics was there's so much in the world now that is literally the opposite. Like, it's turning kids away from God.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. And as parents, like, it terrifies me because I can't control everything.
No.
So, you know, I can only do what's in my power to show them the way they should be going. But if they're not home or they're at a friend's house or they're wherever and they're seeing things that's outside of my control, like you said, we can only do so much and hope that they find that right path.
Yeah. God is calling for them. God is chasing for them, but it's their choice. They have to choose to follow him. And I, switching gears a little bit again, I told you it's going to be not super planned out and not planned out, but not super structured that we're going to hit point A to point B, but switching over to where you talk about unchecked anger, at the risk of just generalizing here, I think that is the struggle of a lot of men. And I think a lot of men have to hit that point where they're like, you know what? I need to figure this out. Why am I showing this unchecked anger? And I think a lot of it is, it's the easiest response.
Oh, 100%.
Like, what's easier to do? Cry in front of your friends or get angry and throw something in front of your friends?
Yep.
Whether it's a 16-year-old boy rage quitting video games and punching the wall, or it's a grown man hanging out with buddies and he gets mad and he throws something. It is always easier to uncheck your anger than it is to acknowledge the feelings.
And I think for me, I let it like turn my view away from, it wasn't where my anger was pointed that was the problem. The problem was in myself, and I masked it with that anger. So like, I had internal issues that I needed to deal with, and it was in my walk with God. Like, those were things I needed to deal with, not by myself, but with God. Yeah. And I chose not to. And because I chose not to, I masked it with anger and blamed it more on me being angry at God than realizing that there's these unresolved issues that I needed to work out with him, not just lash out in anger. Yeah. So it was kind of like internal greed where, you know, I had lost so many family members, and it's so much easier to say, God, it's your fault they're not here anymore, than to seek his guidance and say, like, was there a purpose that you took them, you know, when you did? But for me, it was so easy to get mad because my internal greed's like, no, I just want them here. I want their love with me forever, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I feel like I had more pent up greed and misunderstanding than I did anything. So I let that turn around as anger towards God instead of just unpacking those things and taking it to him and trying to talk to him.
That's good stuff right there. I think to some extent we all do that, whether it's, especially when we're grieving. Grief brings so much emotion and anger to the surface. And if we're not allowing God to work in those things, and like, that's exactly what Samson did. Samson clearly had something going on, and like there's a list of the 7 mistakes that he made in week 2 of the series, and he had all these things that he was refusing to do, and there was so many things pulling for his temptation. And I wonder if that, like, unchecked anger was the response to all of those things happening. Yeah, was that the symptom, or was that the problem? Like, I guess I don't know how the best to word that. Was that
like the cause or I don't know, cause and effect kind of thing. Like, what came first? Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. What came first?
Yeah.
Did he get all angry and stuff because he felt that calling that he had and he was just fighting it? And he had all of these things that he wanted to give to God. And so the response from that with emotionally was his anger, or was he angry first and that drove him from God? And that caused him to fall into the sin of lust. I mean, let's be real here. If he's seeking Delilah and he's doing all of these things and he's running around, but I wouldn't be shocked if there was other women other than Delilah that he was involved with.
Oh, and yeah, I wouldn't doubt that either. And I think that just the fact that, 3 different women that's throughout that story that were all Philistine women, like, it's clear that it's a rebellious thing. And that's why it's a good question, like, which came first, the anger or whatever your second point was. But it's trying to identify that, because it was laid out clear for the Israelites. You are not to intermarry with these ones that are chasing other gods. Like, you stay within your people. And even his mom and dad were like, hey, no, you should be picking from your people.
Yeah.
And he's like, nah, I want that one. So it's like
that one.
For me, like, that's just clear rebellion. Like, this wasn't no, I think like this might be a special case. Like, she is actually a really good woman. I want her as a wife. This was no, like, no, I'm rebelling. I don't care what was said. I don't care what the rule is. I want it, and you're going to give it to me.
One of the things I really liked about Ryan's sermon for week 2 was that when you talked about that, when he went there and said, hey, I need you to bring this woman to me as my wife. Ryan goes, and then he went to his daddy.
Yeah.
He went to his daddy and said he needed to get her. He didn't talk to her. And oh man, I was cracking up when I was listening to that.
Yeah, Dad, you have to go get her for me. I can't do it. I need you to go down there.
Just imagine if we still did that. Yeah. Like, hey, Dad, I found a girl.
Can you ask her out for me?
Yeah. I'm just saying, let's make a pact right here. If either one of our sons ask us to ask a girl out for him,
I'm having the other one do it, so you're doing it.
Okay, I'm game. So back on track. Sorry about that, folks. One of the things that really stuck out to me and kind of put me in like 2 parts removed from what Ryan's point was, and it was kind of like, I don't want to say it was contradictory, but it was something that a mix of week 1 and week 2. So week 1, Tim's talking about all of the pressure and all of this calling that you have and the load that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in 2nd grade is when I felt the calling to be a pastor. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what that meant.
So when you bought your first suit?
Yeah. Still have it. Doesn't fit quite as well, but I still had that was when I had no idea what it looked like or anything like that, but that's when I felt the calling. And I wasn't quiet about it either. I mean, I was a loud kid. And so everyone knew this. And I was the snitch through and through. Like, if you were doing something dumb, I was telling my mom, and I was told my siblings, I'm surprised they didn't beat me every single, well, they did, but I'm surprised they didn't kill me. Like, they were just so annoyed with me because they did anything wrong, I'm snitching on them. But then I went through this phase where I wanted to be bad because I had this calling on my life, and because I had this weight of it. It did get tiresome, like Tim was saying. Like, it just got kind of this potential, and I didn't look at it as potential or anything like that. But I was the goody two shoes, and then I tried to like get in and be bad too, and like I'd do something dumb or I'd say something dumb, and everybody would stop, and they'd be like, "Dude,
it's not funny when you do it."
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, wait, what, guys?
Good boy.
What? How'd this happen? I was fitting in, and man, it was a struggle. And so like I actually tried to surround myself with people that I shouldn't have been hanging out with. And like, not all of them were my family, and some of them were my family, some of them were not. And not that I shouldn't hang out with my family. That's not what I'm saying. If you're my family and you're listening to this, I'm not saying I should have kicked you out of the house.
That's not what he told me 5 minutes ago.
Oh goodness.
Just kidding.
But I'd put myself in these situations that I knew going ahead, like this is going to be not good. And then they'd be like, why are you, like, what do you can't be around. And I felt this dejection because of that. I felt this, like, I am separated from all of it. And now I'm an adult. I'm like, yeah, we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
We're called to be different. We're called to be like set apart. We're called to be holy.
Nope.
But as a 10, 12, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, that sucked. And even now, I feel some of that, but I can look at it with a different lens, because now I'll still be on the phone with people of my secular job, and they'll cuss. And then they'd be like, oh, my bad, shouldn't have said that. And it may be because I'm a pastor, or maybe just because he knows I practice my faith. Like, I could just be a Christian and he would still do it. But there's like a instant, like, ooh, I shouldn't have said that in front of Jared. And now I don't look at it as like, oh, I'm left out. But I appreciate that. Like, they know that I am living differently than they typically do.
Yeah, I actually just watched a video. It was on Right Now Media. It was it's like a video at a college where they're going through Romans from start to finish. And he talks about that. He talks about like us now as adults, especially with work, because a lot of jobs do like work events, or they'll get together at the end of work and be like, hey, we're all going to go to the bar. You want to join us, whatever. But it's as you're growing in your like spiritual maturity and knowing where you are with God as adults now, I feel like for me, it's a lot easier to say no now than it was before I got to where I am now.
Oh yeah.
And I was actually going to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, because I was the opposite. I was the one that I was rebellious from the start, and it was kind of a burden switching over, because now I'm leaving that whole life behind me. And I'm coming into something that, like, when you're reading it, you're like, how does anybody do this? Like, this is a lot, which is why, like, when Ryan talked about, I forget which sermon it was, but he talks about how much harder it is to be a Christian than people give us credit for. So, and not that I'm looking for credit, I'm not. But when he says,
he wants you to write him fan letters, actually, and tell him how amazing he's doing.
But it's, people say that, like, oh, you becoming a Christian is you taking the easy way out. And it's not. No. Like, that when I came like full force into it, and when you're reading it, you're like, it's like a boulder of information, and you're like, what do I do with all this? Like, there's so much, but there's a lot, but at the same time, like, when you dive deep into it, it's simplistic. Yeah. Like, it seems like a lot, but it's really not difficult once you understand.
No, I disagree entirely. I think it's incredibly difficult at times.
Our daily walk is different. I'm talking about the concept. Like, when you're reading, the concept can seem extremely overwhelming when you first come into it. When you're trying to read through Romans and Acts, and you're reading all these things that you're being told to do as a Christian under the new covenant, you're like, this is a lot. What? Like, how am I supposed to just let someone hit me and then be like, oh, hit me again? It's like, you're reading it, you're like, it's a lot. But then when you really start grasping the background to it, it's not as difficult as it came across in the beginning. Yeah. It's the daily walk part. That's the hard part.
When those kids aren't listening.
Yeah. The unchecked anger, those kind of things. Yeah. I still struggle with it.
Oh yeah.
But I did have a star next to the point of being empowered versus being controlled by the Holy Spirit.
Ooh, break that down. Give me something.
So and I feel like I've talked to one of you guys about this before, but I always think about when it's talking about like, don't quench the Holy Spirit kind of thing. And you look at like in Romans, when you're reading Romans and you see Paul talking about like, I want to do these good things, but I can't, I'm doing these bad things. Like, the Spirit's there, and it's there with us all the time. And it's trying to guide us in what we should be doing. But a lot of times we, out of our own greed, are telling this. Sorry, I was clicking my pen.
It's like, what is that noise?
Like a nervous habit. But like, we as like Christians, and even just normal people in general, the Spirit is here telling us like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. And it's not just, a sin. It could just be like, hey, in your life right now, you don't need that. And out of our own greed, we're like, you be quiet. I'm going to do it anyway because I want it. So when I think about this, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but when I think about this, like in my daily walk, when I hear like being empowered versus being controlled, I don't see the being controlled part as me losing my free will, but it's letting the Spirit fully empower me and control me, in the sense of like, when I bought the truck, if for any reason I felt like God was like, do not buy that truck, and I was fully engulfed with the Spirit, and the Spirit's like, just don't do it, like, I probably wouldn't have. But there's a lot of times where I feel like people just go against that anyway. Yeah. And it's like, it's one of the greed things. But I think as Christians, we should be trying to do this more often than not, like letting the Spirit fully take us over and be like, hey, you can't do that right now. It's not good for you. Whether it be, the story of Samson, like, don't get with that woman, don't get with that woman. Like, you need to hold strong and hold what you were told to do. But I feel like we turn away from that a lot, and we try to quench the Spirit and just be like, no, it's my greed. I want it. Yeah. Which is exactly what Samson did. They told him like, hey, don't pick her. And he's like, nope, I want it. I don't care what any of you say.
Well, that's exactly what it is. The chain of sin is broken. We're free of that. We don't have to choose it, but it doesn't stop drawing us to it. There's still like instant gratification in things. And as Christians, we have to choose to die to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have to choose to have like conscious thought always. And we have to choose to constantly walk in the Spirit. And like, that's why Scripture tells us to pray constantly, because we cannot do it alone. Give us 5 minutes. We'll screw it up.
Yeah.
It doesn't take long. And man, it's not easy. And I think that's where I was going. That's what I initially thought, where I really liked how Tim was talking about how hard it had to be from the start for Samson, because he had this calling on his life.
Yeah. Especially when your parents are told before you're even born that you're going to do these great things.
Oh yeah.
They may not have known the exact details, but they were told this, he's going to do great things. And then as he's getting older, they're like, you can't do that because, you know, you have this thing already set for you. Like, you're going to be doing these things. So you can't do that. You can't go with your friends over there and do that. You're like, you're separated by yourself. And
I'm sorry, this may seem trivial, but even to the point of the dude didn't cut his hair.
Yeah.
And there was neighborhood, if that's what you would call it, kids around. Like, he had to be the odd man out almost always.
Yeah.
Like, he was the kind of weird dude because he didn't cut his hair. He didn't drink. He wasn't supposed to do these things.
Pictures of Samson probably do the justice of how long his hair probably really was.
That was probably the most annoying part of all of it.
Yeah.
It's just like hairs everywhere. But it's this constant thing. And so I feel like after week 1, we kind of, at least myself, my perception changed of the story. Because I always hear the story of Samson and Delilah and him just getting played again and again and again. And you're like, dude, this guy is just, think for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. But man, to have that kind of calling on your life from the get-go, and then you get to the point where, because I believe it's somewhat biological for kids to want to like be their own person at some point. He has all those feelings. He has all those hormones that are going through him. He has all that angst as a teenager. I don't know if they had teenager angst back then. That might have just be from the 90s. Who knows? But you had all of these things. Excuse me. And he's got this calling. He's got this thing that he has to do. His mission's already planned out. All of it's planned out away. And you see some of that today still. You have a kid that grows up in this home where they're like, you're going to be a doctor and you're going to go to this school. And I went to Yale, so you're going to Yale and all of these things. Man, those kids burn out.
Yeah.
This when we plan all those things, it is hard to fulfill or live up to those things. And so, I don't know. I'm ranting, but that's kind of what this podcast is: ranting about our thoughts on the sermon.
Yeah.
What else?
I really like to. I don't know if it was one of the main points. I think it was in one of the weeks. I can't remember which one, but facing our weaknesses.
Ooh.
And that is a hard one, because even reading like what their notes were on it, and then also me, because this is what I do. Like when I start reading stuff, I start trying to like point to where I've seen it before, but in different ways. But I even look at my own life and you see like our weaknesses, if we don't identify them, like they were saying in these sermons, like they do become destructive, and it puts you in like a perpetual rebellion. Like it's just a pendulum that just keeps going back and forth because you're not dealing with your weakness. It's still there.
Yeah.
This is one that I was talking to you about, with like Paul in 2 Corinthians, when he's talking about that thorn in his flesh. And we even talked about it, at the Forge, where at this point in Paul's walk, like he knows all the things that he did in his past. And now he's got this thorn in his flesh. And to me, like when I think about it, it's that constant reminder of all the things he did. And he has to think about this, like even in his current walk with Christ. Yeah. And when he goes to God and he said, hey, just take this thorn away from me. And God's like, my grace is good enough. So when I think about the the weaknesses that I have in my life, or I used to have in my life, for me, it's when I go to God humbly and I put those things before him and I talk to him, that the grace that he gives me is the strength that I get out of it. So like when I take it to him and like Paul, he's like, hey, my grace is good enough. Like, you believe in me. You are here dropping this at my feet. I'm giving you my grace. Now go strong away from me. You know what I'm saying? Like, once we're able to identify these things that are obviously like weighing us down, these weaknesses that we have that are constantly causing some issue in our life, and we drop it at his feet and he takes it for us and gives us his grace, like that's when we're made strong. And you see it with Samson. Like, how many times did he fail and something happened over and over and over? And then at the very end, when he finally realizes, like, this is all happening because I turned from him, and he turns to God and says, you know, put your eyes on me. I'm looking for you. Give me strength.
Yep.
And what happens? God gives him his strength. Yep. So for me, it's just realizing these things that we have wrong and being able to identify them. And like, even as scripture says, like, just lay it at his feet. He's going to take it.
And Ryan touched on that. I think it was Ryan who preached this one the last week. To never underestimate the value of our spiritual heritage. Like Samson, we may take for granted the blessings and teachings we've received, leading us astray from our calling. But when we never forget our spiritual heritage, we also know where we can go back to. That it doesn't matter how far we've strayed. It doesn't matter what dumb things we've done. It doesn't matter, because as Christians, we will probably at some point stray a little bit. Now, it could be dependent on how far, but especially if you grow up in the church, like if you grow up in the church, I've seen it countless times, and it's heartbreaking because we see it a lot, but it's also so great when they come back. I know a ton of people who grew up in the church, got to 18, 19 years old, and they ran away. They ran away from God. They're like, I want nothing to do with it. I'm running. Forget this. I didn't sign up for this. I was born into this. I'm going to deconstruct. And then 5 years, 10 years down the road, I start seeing some of them come back, and they remembered their spiritual heritage. They remembered that, hey, I've screwed up enough. I've given the other side enough tries, and I'm not getting fed like I was with Christ. And I remember how I got fed. I remember what that felt like. And so I'm going to go back to him. And it is so crucial to remember our spiritual heritage. And yes, Ryan talked about how we can take advantage of it and take it for granted. And this is flipping that over. But we need to remember that as parents. We need to remember that as youth pastors, as people in the church, right? Like, I'm the youth pastor, sure, but I know there's countless people in this church that see Danica Borzi and get all excited and say hi to her, or see the Curtis kids and get excited to see them and say hi to them. I pray to God they don't ever walk away. But if they did, we're there to bring them back. We're there to love on them. They're going to remember those moments. And there's always something pulling them away. That's what the world does. The world is going to attract us and attempt to pull us away from Christ. And when we feed into those kids and we nurture them and we love on them and we see them Sunday morning and that's it, or we see them Sunday morning and Sunday evenings and we reach out to them maybe in the week, those things, they remember those things. They remember that when they come back here, it might be a little awkward for people at times, like, yeah. And we just, hey, welcome back. We're so happy you're here. And it just means so much to people.
I mean, I know it's a little bit different because it's father and son, but it's like, it reminds me of the story of the father with the two sons, and the one went away. And when he comes back, he gives them the calf or whatever as dinner. And the other son. Yeah. And the other son is like, I've been here this whole time and you haven't given it to me. But he tells him, he's like, yes, but your brother has come back. You've been here with me the whole time. Like, you're already going to get your reward. He is coming back. Like, we should be rejoicing in this. So like, even with the church, like you're saying, like if someone walks away and they remember their spiritual heritage and they come back, we shouldn't shun them away because they walked away. We should be rejoicing in the fact that they're coming back to God.
Yeah. So. And we need to, just to drive it home, because I don't know, I'm thinking about it now. And so we're going to get in on this. We need to nurture those relationships to have that spiritual heritage there.
Yeah.
We need to work to make sure that whether it's not, it may not be a student, it may be an adult, right? Just because someone comes here the first time. If you see someone here that you haven't seen before, say hi to them.
Yeah.
Welcome them, make them happy. Not make them happy, but like make them feel welcome or make them feel happy because you're smiling with them. But it is those connections and those relationships and those things that are tied to Christ, that are from Christ too, I believe, that we have those opportunities because Christ has given us that ability. Like some people can welcome and bring joy to people like you wouldn't believe. And that's a gift that they've got.
Yeah.
And we can use that to draw them back to the church when they've messed up. In our life group, we were just talking about being pure of heart before they will see God. We're going over the Beatitudes. And one of the things that I can't remember, is it Chandler?
Yeah.
Matt Chandler's doing it. And he said that this is about them coming back when we mess up. And man, let them come back and confess.
Yeah. He's like, I think it was between like the pure of heart part is the coming back when we mess up. Like if we do fall into that temptation or sin, versus the opposite end of the spectrum where they do things and then they run away.
Yep.
So
that's it. And we are, I don't know why I said we are. I forgot where I was going with that. Losing my mind over here. One of the things that really stuck out to me was the need for emotional self-control and how that isn't just being able to shove down your emotions. Emotional self-control isn't shoving down your emotions. It is
for me, it's learning the right and wrong times to let those emotions out. There's right and wrong times and places for everything.
Yeah.
And we should have I don't know if discernment's the right word for it, but to know if it's the right time or moment for those emotions. Like we talked about, even with the Beatitudes, it's like anger, like you should know when the right time for anger is. Like anger is not just something you let out because, whatever, you got upset about something. Like when you look at all the stories about Jesus, he only let that anger out when it was rightly justified.
Yeah.
So with the emotions, like we have to understand when the right time for those emotions are.
And so there will be a right time for a man to cry. There will be a right time for a man.
On your shoulder though.
Never on my shoulder. Never.
Bet.
I don't like wet clothes. I don't want my shoulder to be all wet. No. There'll be a right time for a man to get all excited, and there'll be a right time for a woman to cry and a woman to get angry and a woman to be all excited and what have you. I harp on men because I feel like men shove their emotions down a whole lot.
Yep.
And that's a generalization. And I completely recognize that that's a generalization. And there's people are different, right? All kinds of people do different types of things. And so I acknowledge that. But so often we think we have emotional self-control because we just shove it down. But we're just building this big old problem that we're going to have to deal with down the road. And if we, with self-control, acknowledge our feelings and talk about them if Allison upsets me or if Allison hurts me, then I can't just ignore it and shove it down because eventually by the end of the week, I'm going to get super angry and yell at her. And it's probably going to be a Saturday night or Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's how it went for a long time. And it's not just like on my way to Fresh Wind. Like when we first got married, I just bottle it up. And then we're going to church. And then Satan's like, hey, you should bring all that up right now. A
little splash of this.
Yeah. And I'm just super angry on the way. And then we're both angry sitting through church and we're not getting fed because we're just angry.
And then you can't even remember why you're angry.
Yeah, because there's all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so when we feel hurt, when we feel angry, when we feel these things, we go up to the person and address it. And scripture lays that out for us too. We go straight up to the person and talk about the issues that we have. And that just doesn't mean only for the church. That means at home. And if we got to put it in the workplace.
Yeah.
If there's something going on at work, don't bring it home.
Yeah, address it at work.
And with self-control.
Yes,
that's where the emotional self-control comes in. Are we going to be like Samson and just rip the whole place down? No, that's not our calling. Just for the record.
I don't think I could perform like that anyway.
I mean, I've been working out like once a month lately. Like, I'm almost there.
You're almost.
But we as Christians are called to be peacemakers a lot. And we have to choose to be peacemakers. And before we can do that, before we can be the ones bringing peace to the situation, we have to have that emotional self-control. Because if I'm walking up to you all the time and saying, Charles, hey, let's just relax and bring some, I'm going to bring some peace to this situation. That's my goal.
Yeah.
Every time you're angry, or every time you're upset, or every time whatever happens. But when I'm angry, I'm justified. So I'm allowed to yell and throw a fit and be angry. And what's peace? No one's going to listen to us. We can never be peacemakers like that. But if people see us taking those hits or addressing these things with self-control, with like a clear dialogue, things like that, then when we walk up and say, hey, let's address this, I'm just going to mediate the situation, say. I'm not saying that we should always put ourselves in a situation. There's discernment and wisdom needed there. But it's kind of like when you're screaming all the time and la-da-da-da-da, and then you're surprised that your kid's yelling all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, come on now. Where do you think they got it? And so
definitely not me.
Yeah. Eric has talked to me. I know it's all from you. No.
Not bad.
We have to choose to do that. And that starts with emotional self-control. And I don't know. That was where I'm at with this. We're at the last week. You got anything else you want to throw in here?
I don't know. Like, I don't want to make it into like a big thing because I know it can go in a bunch of different directions.
Ooh, we're gonna be here for the long haul.
I did tell Erica. So the biggest thing with Samson, right? The sexual desires and lusts. And I was talking to Erica and I'm like, obviously his biggest issue is the fact that he was getting with ungodly women. Yep. So they weren't women of God. They were women that were, worshiping other gods and doing things they shouldn't have been doing. Samson obviously doing something that God forbid to begin with. Like, you do not intermarry with these people. But one of the lessons I think listening to this is like, and I know it's always like a hard topic, especially for a husband to talk to with his wife. But I told her, I'm like, biblically speaking, in the Bible, it says women submit to your husbands, but it also tells the husbands, love your wife as Jesus loved the church. So when I lay it out for her, like when I'm talking to her about this, I try to come at it with the most amount of respect in the sense of, does the Bible say to you to submit to me? Yes, but I need to be someone worthy of you submitting to. In the same way, if I'm to love you as Christ loved the church, you should be someone worthy of my love. And, vice versa. So like this whole situation would have been different if he would have been following that path.
Are you saying rather than lust, he had love and have been someone worthy of submission to? But on both
sides. So like you look at this story and you like the issue comes from the fact that he's chasing these women that didn't have the same moral standards that he should have had. Yep. So the whole time throughout, his relationship with, what should have been his wife in the beginning, she went against him out of fear because they're like, oh, well, we're going to burn you and your family if you don't tell us. But if she was of, like God values, it wouldn't have mattered what they said. She would have been, with her husband or with her future husband, and she wouldn't have betrayed him the way that she did.
Yeah.
And then same thing with Delilah, and same thing, when he went into I forget what the terminology is for it in that time, but like the brothel with that other woman. But like you look at those things, and if they were of the right people, the way we were commanded to begin with, there wouldn't have been that issue. So when I talked to Erica about it, I'm like, our marriage is in such a different place now than it was before, because I think as husband and wife and reading the word and, we are of one flesh and we are these things, like there's not that gap between us anymore. So there shouldn't be room for those people coming in saying, hey, like, I need you to get me this information so you can betray him and I can come in and do these things. The wife or, whatever woman in that situation should have never even wavered. There shouldn't have been this like, oh yeah, I'll betray him for you.
Yeah.
But it's like, so I read this and I'm like, that's obviously, yes, his lust played a factor, but I look at the relationship and I look at my own life. And I know it's a little bit off topic of Samson's story itself, but I feel like there's still underlying lessons in there.
Oh,
and I think the whole, like, I wouldn't today go and necessarily, like, if I wasn't married, didn't have kids, whatever, I wouldn't pick a relationship with someone who didn't share those values as me. And here you see him doing it over and over and over and over. And I feel like that led to such a big issue. Whereas like with me and Erica, like we share our moral values and we share our ideas on things. And I don't, if we were in that time, I don't know if someone could have went up to Erica and been like, hey, I need you to tell me this information or I'm going to burn you, whatever. Like, I don't know. Maybe she wouldn't have done those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry. I feel like I'm rambling about it.
No, I'm listening. I'm into it.
It's just one of those things where I think it's who we surround ourselves with. It's what relationships are we making in life. But it was just like a little like side note that I had for myself because I look at who I have in my life today and are they in line with my belief system? And in the sense of like, is that person in my life going to stray me away from my ideas? And I've slowly, since I've been, doing all these things, I'm trying to work myself where I'm not surrounding myself with those people anymore.
Yeah. That is being equally yoked and being people with the same faith, belief system, whatever you want to call it. Because I think Ryan made a good point. Like, it could be Christians and Catholics.
Yeah.
Like, when do we baptize our kid? That's a big question. Because you ask me, I don't baptize my kid. My kid chooses to be baptized. And then you ask a Catholic, oh, right when they're born. Or there's a set date. But there's a lot that can go wrong with those conversations. There's a lot that can go wrong with those relationships. And we have to be on the same plane as a couple, as a marriage, as one. Like it'll cause so many issues. And that's not to say that every single time and then all of this and marriages will never work like that. It's not how God designed it. It's not how God wants it. But I don't want to leave people feeling like we're saying that, oh man, you guys don't agree 100%. It's terrible, because that's not the case.
No.
But I'm sure that there are some stress points at times, and it could be to varying degrees. But when we can have a relationship where we have that same plan, that conversation's had. I remember, I can't remember who it was, but they have that conversation date one, just right out the rip. Like, look,
what do you believe?
Exactly.
Oh, no, never mind. See it.
Like, how many kids do you want?
Yeah.
What's your plan in 10 years? Where do you want to move away? What's going on? Like, they just work all that stuff out right away. And I'm like, that's kind of genius.
Yeah. Like, I wouldn't say that we agree on absolutely everything. Like, obviously in life group the other day, there are going to be things that we don't 100% agree on. I don't think that those things are, like I said, they're not a salvation issue. Like, those are just things that, some people don't agree on.
Major on the major.
Yes.
Minor on the minors.
But what I mean by that is that we both have the same understanding of how we should be as Christians. So, and even how we should be together, not to say that we're perfect in it, because we're not at all.
Yeah.
We have our moments where we're arguing and everything else, but I think just in terms of our relationship, though, it's in a whole different place now because we both have a different understanding of how we should be as a couple.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like the ones who don't have the same faith or belief, just like the stories we read about in here, like it's going to cause conflict in between. And whether it's, the person who is, actively seeking God, if they're taking in too much from someone who's like, man, I don't believe in all that. But I don't know. Like I said, I just wrote it down. I didn't want to get like super deep into it just because I know it can go really far.
Yeah.
But my thing is more so that it's just something I see throughout his whole story, that he's constantly putting himself in that situation with people he shouldn't have been. And
who you surround yourself with determines your future.
Yeah, 100%.
And so that's what we got for this week or this month or session or this episode, whatever you want to call it, with the Blue Chair Podcast. Please remember to go ahead and send an email to the Blue Chair Podcast at afreshwind.org. We want to hear your thoughts throughout the month. We want you to give us some conversation starters. Send us something, and maybe we'll invite you on. Maybe we'll talk about it between the two of us. However that looks, this is all new, that we're still working out exactly how these things are going to play out. We want your thoughts on what parts you chewed on, what parts you struggled with, what parts did you just really like. It's not I think Ryan was wrong here when he said. That's not what that is. And like, hey, if you're chewing on something and you're like, this is how he typically thought of it, but Ryan made this point and now I'm chewing on it, that's okay. But we're not tearing anything down. We do want to hear some thoughts from you guys though. So send an email to bluechairpodcast@afreshwind.org and we would really appreciate it. All right, guys, we'll see you Sunday. See you later.